exercise we're going to work on now is actually the drum pattern out of a Vela Maya song, It's Not Safe to Swim Today. It's from the the breakdown section in that song. I love this song. The whole album is absolutely amazing. If you are not familiar with Vela Maya, definitely go check out, search that song, It's Not Safe to Swim Today. It's such a great song. I mean, there's just so many things going on drum-wise. But the breakdown part, I think, is really cool. And one of the reasons I thought it'd be a good example to show is that I think it is one that a lot of people will be familiar with by way of just being familiar with the song. But what's really cool about this, we've been talking a lot about, syncopation. We've talked about polyrhythms. We've talked about, the importance of understanding just note values and the basics of theory and stuff. This is a pattern that can kind of bring a lot of things into kind of one exercise here. But what makes this particular pattern really interesting, but also really difficult to kind of wrap your head around at first, is it's polyrhythmic. So the way that this pattern works, or the way that it maps out, is it's 4 bars, but it's 3 bars of 4/4, with the 4th bar being a bar of 2/4, and that's mathematically how it works out. Because on our hands, we're keeping just a straight, quarter note on, well, the way it's played in the song is on a china. The example we're going to start with is just on the ride, just by way of simplicity and noise, but it's just quarter notes. And then we're doing the snare on the count of 3. So that is that's it with as far as the relationship of what's happening with our hands. The pattern on our feet, the way that it works out, like the grouping works out, so we're doing 5, 4, and then 2. And it's just a repeating pattern of 16th notes built in this, 5 hits, rest, 4 hits, rest, 2 hits, rest, repeat. The way that works out, as you can see from the graphic there, is that particular drum pattern on the kick is actually in 7/8. So we're playing a pattern that's in 7/8 against bars that are 4/4. That's why mathematically, that 4th bar of the 4-bar grouping is a 2, because that's what kind of resolves it all back to the 1 again. So don't get too caught up in the math of it all, but it's important to understand that relationship and also get you kind of thinking of like, oh, that's kind of cool, as far as how to create some of your own drum parts and stuff like that can be really interesting when you start to break it down mathematically to make sure that it lines up, groove wise and as all the bars line up and stuff like that. You don't always have to be playing in this very, linear 4/4 16th note groupings. You can really start to mix it up and create some pretty interesting grooves and patterns. So if you look at the graphic there and the way we've got the feet mapped out by way of right and left, you can see, where those rests are of which foot would be, if we were to play through, which foot it would be. We just continue in a pattern as if we were to play through. And it works out perfectly, like the entire cycle through that 7/8, it comes back on the 1, so that we're starting again with our lead foot, whether you're leading with your right or your left, if you do it that way. So the way that, to do it in a manner that you're just like that continuous flow, so it worked like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, rest. 1, 2, rest. 1. So you can see how if we are resting on the foot that would be sort of in the natural flow of things anyway, the whole cycle comes back around. You can play it. This particular groove, like within this song, is not at such a speed that, if you want to be always leading with your right, you can pull that off and probably still make it work. Like I said, I play it both ways just by way of kind of experimenting, and it's good just to practice the control and stuff like that. So you would do it like this, where it would be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rest, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you still rest, and then 1, 2, rest, and then you're starting again on the right foot. The challenge I find with that, again, this is personal preference. Like I said, it's not that you have to play it one way or the other, but my own personal preference is that to play it where the natural flow, or the what would be the natural flow if you're doing just straight 16th notes, where when you get to that last 4, you'd be resting with your right, so that you're actually starting the 2 with your left. Can feel a little bit unnatural at first, but that's kind of the whole point. And one of the things we worked on with the one of the first exercises in this whole syncopation section was to get you comfortable with doing that, where you're constantly resting on alternate feet to create that kind of I don't even know what you call the feel, but it's just kind of this back and forth thing. By doing that, like I said, it kind of just sets you back up again to just keep the flow going. Next step would be obviously to introduce the snare I mean, you can go right at it and go with both hands at once, but I think one of the best ways is to start with just one hand at a time. You're comfortable with that and get really solid with that and be able to wrap your head around the timing, then the next step and the next step. And what's really interesting when you bring in just the snare, because the snare is in on the count of 3 in the bar of 4/4 versus the 7/8, you're going to see how it lines up differently relative to this cycle of the kick pattern. And that's obviously what gives it this really kind of off-kilter kind of feel to it, and can be a little bit tricky to kind of wrap your head around at first, is because as opposed to whether you're doing like a syncopated pattern or not. I mean, even if you're just doing a straight 16th note run where it's always just 2 and 4, or just on the 3, it's always coming down in the same place within the pattern, so it's easy to kind of keep that consistency. You don't have to think about it too much because you can just totally go into muscle memory. With this one, we have this like this continuous pattern with the feet on the kick, but we're accenting on the snare relative to that pattern in different spots every single time, and that's where it can get a little bit tricky and kind of throw your mind for a bit of a loop. So it's going to work like this, and like I said, don't worry about starting with the click, just to kind of get the muscle memory down. So if we were to think of this whole 5/4/2 pattern, it's going to work out like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 16th note rest, 1, 2, 3, 4, rest, 1, 2, rest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rest, 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the rest, on the second go around, is where we hit the snare, and then, right? So then for the third round, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rest, 1, 2, 3, 4, rest. And this is where it can be a little bit tricky and kind of throw you off at first, depending on if, for this last grouping of 2, if you're going to lead with your right or your left, is that the snare, the accent by way of, where it lines up and on the beat 3 of the 4/4, for this third rotation of this the kick pattern, the snare lands on the second hit of this grouping of 2. So if you were to play it through in more of a linear sense, where you're just keeping your footing alternating naturally, then it would be, for this last grouping of 2, it would be 1, 2. And that's why I think that, to kind of break away for a second here, to keep your footing in just like the continuous alternating pattern, by way of what is more natural to you, to keep kind of the power and the groove, and especially when you start getting the speed up over 150 beats a minute with this particular groove, when it lines up so that the snare hit on the 3 works out to be happening with the second hit of that last grouping of 2 on the kick. If we're leading with our left, then it comes down. Everything comes down on the right. If we're leading with our right, then obviously our left hand is hitting with our left foot, which is fine, but it might just be a little bit unnatural for you at first, by way of what you're used to when you're doing your just straight ahead beat keeping, where everything is always like your left hand is always landing with your right if you're leading right, or opposite if you're left-handed. So like I said, start super slow and just work on getting the coordinated, kind of hand left to right and hand to feet and so on, as far as mapping out exactly where those hits are going to go. And after you get comfortable with the snare, with the way that it lines up within the kick pattern each time, then you can start to bring in the quarter notes on the ride or on the crash or China, whatever you choose to use as you're developing it. Doesn't really matter, but as long as your timing is consistent. From there, that's when you want to start introducing the click. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 different examples of 3 different tempos, just to give you an idea of where this groove can start to develop.